Kia ora, friends, subscribers, patrons, and the casual viewer. Markie here, and today I want to demystify something called sexual anorexia, which you probably never heard of. Very few people have. So this isn't based on something that I've put together. This is based on the work of Dr. Patrick Carnes. He's got some great material out there, so check out Patrick Carnes. He writes a lot of stuff around sex addiction, and from me, don't let anybody tell you that there is no such thing as sex addiction, because there is. Okay, I've said this in other videos. It's very out of favour at the moment in the kind of the psychological community, but it's real. And if you want some evidence of that, then check out the work of people like Gary Wilson, which I've referenced at other times. Sex addiction is very real. I've worked with sex addicts. My background is mainly in addiction, and yes, there is such a thing. So what is sexual anorexia? Well, let's take a look at what normal anorexia is, or anorexia nervosa, which of course is an eating disorder. So anorexia nervosa is a condition where people self-starve. They deprive themselves of food. Okay, not because they are insane, but because lots of psychological reasons. Nearly all psychological problems or conditions, or certainly kind of behaviours, are done for essentially positive reasons, ostensibly positive reasons. So where there's a lot of emotional pain, so there's nearly always trauma. There's nearly always distress, there's nearly always attachment issues, all kinds of things going on that's leaving somebody feeling really bad. It could be also underlying conditions like ADHD and stuff like that. And the act of self-starvation often gives people control, or a sense of control, where they have no control elsewhere in their lives. It can be tied in with other things like body dysmorphic disorder, and there is a high from not eating. I've never experienced it myself, as you can probably tell. So that is why people are anorexic. Okay, because they're experiencing some emotional pain and some emotional difficulties, and it's a way of managing the symptoms of that. What's the opposite of anorexic? Well, overeating. Compulsive overeating, one of the most sort of under-addressed issues I know I'm always talking about under-addressed issues in the field of psychotherapy, in the field of mental health. This is a very improperly treated condition. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that bariatric surgery and things like that don't have a place. I think they definitely do. I think most things have a place. But actually, there's a 12-step group called Overeaters Anonymous that have the answer to overeating. Diets don't work. Overeaters Anonymous has the answer to people who pathologically and addictively overeat. It's readily available, but nobody talks about it, which is a great crime, I think. So they're the two ends of the spectrum, the two extremes. So what else is there? Well, of course, there's bulimia. And bulimia is essentially a swinging between the two. So with bulimia, there's a binge cycle where people overeat, and then a purge cycle where they make themselves sick. Okay, swinging from one to the other. So what then is sexual anorexia? Well, talked about sex addiction. So sex addiction isn't what people think it is. People kind of, people laugh and say, oh, sex addiction, chance to be a fine thing, I'd like that. Sex addiction doesn't mean having lots of healthy sex all the time. Sex addiction usually takes people to some very dark places. Sex addiction is usually about pornography, and see my videos on pornography and the dangers of that. It's also about engaging sex workers and escorts, often becoming bankrupt, overspending. It's about risky behaviours. It can be about unprotected sex. It can be about sexual harming. It can be all kinds of things. But sex addiction is not fun. You don't wish you were a sex addict. I promise you. Okay. And there's also kind of other addictions that go alongside sex addiction. So people talk about sex and love addicts and things like that. So we won't get into that. That's kind of will complicate the issue and muddy the waters a little bit. But sex addiction is real. Compulsive sexual behaviours. By definition, or certainly by the definition I use, an addiction is only an addiction if it's either leads to harmful consequences, or will lead to harmful consequences to self or others. Okay, so if you're having loads of sex and it's not causing you any harm, it's not causing anyone else any harm, there's no no appreciable risks involved and everybody's happy, that's not sex addiction. Okay, sex addiction is problematic by its very nature. You will be suffering, or the people that you are attempting to have sex with or having sex with will be suffering, or the people around you, your children, or people will be neglected as a result of you indulging in those addictive behaviours. So, okay, so that's addiction. Okay, addiction isn't just doing a lot of stuff, because then we'd all be breathing addicts, wouldn't we, if that was the case? Or, water addicts, or, stuff like that. So you've got the equivalent of overeating is sexual addiction, and there is a flip side which nobody ever talks about, apart from Markie. Come here, I talk about the things that you don't hear about anywhere else. Sexual anorexia. Okay. So somebody who has sexual anorexia will be sexually aversive. That's probably a word that we're more familiar with, who is sexually aversive. I don't mean asexual, that's a different thing. Although there might be some crossover, because we don't always know why people are asexual, and people use these terms in slightly different ways. But move asexual out of the picture for now. And so what we're talking about is people who are disgusted by sex, people who are very uncomfortable and switched off, and actually, really want to pull away from any sexual imagery or any mention of sex, or double entendre or smutty humour, or clothing or images on TV that are very sexualised. So a real revulsion against sex, which I suppose, in a way, at a certain age, we're probably all like that, aren't we? It's like if you talk to boys of a certain age about kissing, they'll he kissed a girl, they see that as disgusting. And actually, I think on the face of it, sex is pretty disgusting, isn't it? Really, because it involves going down to some sweaty, sticky, hairy areas, and lots of physical effort. So it's only because of the reward center in the brain that signals to us that this is good, that instinctual racial survival mechanism that kind of makes us like sex, and sometimes it makes us like it too much. Okay, so in the case of the sex addiction, so maybe it's not that surprising. And also, if you think of attitudes to sex, these things are all biopsychosocial. So religious hangovers, or hangovers from prior to the age of contraception or effective contraception. So there's a whole bunch of social reasons why we might be turned off sex. There's a whole bunch of physical reasons why we might be turned off sex, and it's only our brains that tell us that that fire up with sexual things that makes us do it in the first place, really. So and then the other side of it is, of course, people who've experienced sexual harm and sexual abuse of various kinds, which is very, very common, much more common than people think. And that's not necessarily molestation. That's the thing that people think of, but just being exposed to a sexual vibe, a creepy uncle that maybe doesn't touch you but kind of looks at you in a certain way. That's enough. These things are enough to kind of cause damage. So sexual anorexia. So if you like, that's So sexual anorexia is the same as sexual aversion. And then, of course, we still have the equivalent of sexual bulimia, where somebody swings between one and the other. Okay, so they've got the hard drive, strong sexual attraction. Maybe that might be particularly strong, probably stronger than most. But they've also got some imprinting and some history and some whatever the causal factors might be that gives them a sense of aversion to sex and a sense of guilt and shame and dirtiness around sex, and they swing between one and the other. They binge, like the food addict binges on food, eats too much, and then they feel absolutely terrible, and they vomit. Not physically vomit, but they will. So if somebody, for example, is sexually bulimic and they are great users of porn, then they would get rid of any sort of bookmarks of pornography that they've got on their computer. I mean, I guess some people still have videos and magazines, that still happens. So in which case they would, dump those. They burn them all in the back garden and say, I'm kissing goodbye to all this malarkey. It's disgusting. I hate it. And then at some future point they would swing back and they would start acquiring the pornography or sourcing the pornography and stuff. So this is really interesting for lots of reasons. But it's particularly interesting when we brand certain people hypocrites. And the kind of people that we get branded hypocrites are often preachers. I always tend to think they're American preachers, but they can't all be American preachers. But the American preacher is kind of such an archetype, isn't it, really? So you get the kind of preachers that are very very, very puritanical. They can be homophobic, they can be extremely prudish and prurient. That's a good word, isn't it? I'm not sure if that's the right word. And kind of talk about sexual things as being sinful, masturbation being sinful, lustful thoughts being sinful, sex before marriage being sinful, and be really hardcore on all of this stuff. And then a little bit further down the line, they're busted for they're found with a whole bunch of sex workers in their house having an orgy, or they might be busted with a lot of pornography or something like that in one way or another. People say, "Oh, terrible hypocrites," as they say one thing and they're doing this other thing. If you look at it in a different way, in a more sympathetic way, maybe they're not hypocrites. Maybe they are suffering from sexual bulimia. Okay. So one of the things that I haven't mentioned in this video, because I want to make this video available and of interest to everybody, but it is particularly relevant to people that I think it's interesting to look at whether there is an element of sexual bulimia or sexual addiction or sexual anorexia in your retroactive jealousy. Okay, so for those who don't know what retroactive jealousy is and you're not interested in that kind of thing, just pretend I didn't say that, and we'll skip to the ending. But that's a really interesting question. I'd be very interested to hear from. Well, I'm always interested to hear comments, but I'd be particularly interested to hear from any comments from anyone that suffers with retroactive jealousy, or as a partner that suffers with retroactive jealousy, or an interest in the subject, about links between those two things. There's an element of compulsion around sex and an element of aversion and disgust around sex, which I think that could be a big factor in retroactive jealousy. So, moving on from that, let me know what you think in the comments. You can tell me that I've got the iPhone that I'm filming this on around the wrong way, because I've just noticed that I have, but when I sit down it's easy to hold, otherwise I get kind of like old thumbs around the outside. Because I'm sitting in my armchair, I've just got back, I'm tired. I was going to do this video properly in proper stand and proper lighting and all that kind of thing, but you're getting the homely approach here. So if you want to see an improvement in the quality of my output, then please consider becoming a patron. A patron is like a sponsor where you donate a small amount of money, or amount of money of your choice, but it can be as little as $1 a month, and that helps fund me to make more videos, make better videos, and crank the whole thing up a few notches. If you love me but you don't love me enough to part with any of your hard-earned cash, even if it's $1, which is I think 67 pence from UK. If I'm not worth 67 pence to you, then consider being a subscriber on my channel. And if I'm not worth subscribing to you but you like the video, please click the little thumbs up likey button on there. That's the end of the commercials. I hope this has been of interest. I hope it gets some discussion going. People don't talk about these things enough, which is why I have this channel. So having said that, all there remains to be said is Rangi Marie.